Model Making Guru is sponsored by emodels.co.uk, your one-stop shop for all your model making needs. emodels.co.uk. Make something awesome. Hey everyone, it's Foxx from Model Making Guru here. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Warhammer Conquest Partwork series. Now, if you remember, I said last time that what I'm doing from now on is shorter, more frequent episodes, where in each episode we'll just look at one issue of the magazine. And this is what we're going to do this time. We're going to be looking at issue 15. This is episode 7 of the series. It gets very confusing. Episode 7, which is issue 15, and we'll be building and starting the painting on the Biologus Putrifier. He's a really nasty Death Guard dude who goes around not only assessing how effective the poisons and nasty plagues and horrible gifts of Nurgle that get infected onto his enemies are, but also formulating new ones and infecting people at the same time. So he's a pretty nasty guy. But we're going to be building this guy and painting him up. Now, we're not going to be giving this guy special treatment. He's going to be painted just like it says in the magazine. He's not going to be one of our special standouts. So with no further ado, I shall get ready. We'll get assembling this guy and we'll get him painted. Okay, so first up, obviously, we need to do the assembly. Now, you'll notice here, if you're watching previous videos, I've been getting parts off the sprue with my very expensive and beautiful God hand nippers that I adore. However, I'm not doing that now, and I'll explain why. Now, if you use these Citadel side cutters, or if you use the ones that came with the magazine or any other sort of bog standard cutters, you can ignore this little section. However, if you are using some expensive God hand nippers or similar expensive ones, I live in the UK and these are very hard to get hold of without paying £12 billion for shipping from Japan or wherever you get them from. So I don't want these to be damaged. I was gifted these by a very nice follower, but I don't want to damage them because I can't afford to get more. So what I'm doing, instead of cutting parts off the sprue with those, which put them at risk because they are delicate wallflowers with delicate blades that easily break, I'm using these big bad boys. I'm cutting the part off the sprue, but I'm leaving, well, it just fell off, but I'm leaving, where I can, bits of the sprue behind. I'm not cutting right against the plastic part. Now, with these cutters from Games Workshop, or most other cutters that don't cost you £12 billion, if I was to cut right against the part with these nippers, they would gouge the plastic and knacker it horribly, because these are really, really not subtle. And the same with the ones that come with the magazine. They're not delicate, they're not precise, they're just like garden shears. So you want to avoid cutting right against the part if you can possibly help it. I'm going to go a bit closer in with that one, but not right against the part. So I've got that done. Now I can go in with my God hands and I can very carefully nip and cut it back, trim it back so I get rid of that nub. Now note as well, if you're using expensive God hands, don't cut from the tips. Cut with the piece at the back of the blades here where the two blades meet. Don't ever cut from the tip. If you cut from the tip, you put so much stress on there, you're going to damage it. They're only delicate, like I said, they're very precise, but they're very delicate. So you see there the God hands cook very close and a little bit of cleanup needed. So hopefully this way I'm sparing my God hand nippers from doing all the hard grunt work of cutting pieces off the sprue. Some of these are quite hard to get to, so what I'll need to do with these is go in with the knife and try and trim those back because I can't quite get the nippers in there. So if you're using expensive nippers like these, cut pieces off the sprue with your Citadel cutters or the ones that came in the magazine or whatever other cutters you have. If you have expensive ones, just use those to then trim back the little nubs that are left to almost flatness before you go ahead and do some scraping and sanding. Spare these the donkey work. Use them for preciseness to get right against the plastic. And don't cut right against the plastic with these because they'll just gouge everything to hell. So I'll go and get the rest of the parts off the sprue and move on to the next step. Okay, so with that step done, what you should have now is all your parts off the sprue, and where they were attached to the sprue, you'll just have little tiny nubs. If, like me, you use some expensive nippers to trim these back, they'll be quite small. If you just use regular nippers, though, don't worry, they'll be a bit bigger. You'll have some slightly bigger nubs, but it's fine. The next thing we're going to do is part of the process to whittle those down, and it's the same regardless of how big your nubs are. Ooh. So what we need to do, you're going to take your modelling knife or craft knife or hobby knife or scalpel in this case, whatever you use for your cutting, and we're going to try and whittle these down. Now try and use a new blade every time you start a new build, even if it's just a single figure. Put a new blade in just to get the best cut possible. Now if you're young and inexperienced, you might want to get someone old to do this for you, or if you can, cut away from yourself to avoid stabity. I'm going to cut towards myself because I suck at cutting away from myself, but what I'm going to do is brace my thumbs together so I can't really skip and stab myself. Now the trick here is you don't want to cut the whole thing off in one go, spunk like that, because all you'll do is you'll put a big gouge in the plastic, you'll stress the plastic, and you'll get dimples and divots and horrible things. What you want to do is take the blade, get it flat to the surface, and just slowly start to shave that nub away. Keep it parallel to the surface that you're moving it along, and don't go right down to the bottom of it. You want to slowly shave that back. And what you should have after just a few moments is a much reduced nub. Now you might find you have to go both ways, backwards and forwards like this, just to get little edges that stick out. I'm not really putting on any pressure, I'm just gently shaving that away. So that's almost gone. Now it's not gone 100%, so there's still further work I need to do. Once you've trimmed back all those nubs, the next step is to go in with a file or a sanding stick. I'm going to use a file for this particular step, and we're going to just smooth that down even more. There's still a slight, you can still feel it a little bit, there's still a slight nub there. So I'm just going to go in with the file. Now if you're using a metal file, the trick is to go in one direction and not put a lot of pressure on. I'm just going to very gently go over and just smooth this down, and just make sure I get it nice and flat and smooth. Now this is the bottom of a foot that you're never going to see, so it's not that important. But you know, if you're filing some other part, just make sure you get it nice and smooth. So going in one direction, that's that done. Go back in this other direction, just to make sure I get it nice and flat. Now you might be asking, why am I not going backwards and forwards like this? I'm just going one direction each time. You'll just grind up the surface and make a mess. So that's that bit filed. That's now nice and smooth. And what I'll do now is I'll go in with a sanding sponge. This is just a fine grit sanding sponge. I'm just going to go over that again, trying to keep this as flat as possible because I don't want to make it curved. And the purpose of this sanding sponge now is just to kind of sand out any marks that the file may have left behind, just to get it nice and smooth. That's the nub now removed. The foot is smooth. Now with that done, there's just one last step in the cleanup process, and that's to get rid of any obvious mould lines. The mould line is just a little bit of plastic that splooges out when two halves of the moulds are put together. It's an inevitable part of the plastic moulding process. Thankfully though, on Games Workshop kits it's fairly minimal and easily removed. You can see it here going down the middle of the leg. Now there is supposed to be a slight sort of crispy crease in the armour here. It's not supposed to be smooth, but there is an obvious mould line there. You can see it going up that little bit of the knee there. And there is a very slight one around the blade, and in most obviously you'll see it on tubular parts, but we want to clean that off. So all we need to do is very simple. I'm going to use personally my Citadel mould line removal tool, which is it's my favourite tool in the whole world. It's the best tool you'll ever have. However, if you haven't got one, don't worry, you will have got one if you're a subscriber. In the magazine it will be this little thing that you got here. It's the same, it's just got the handle missing. It's not got a smancy schmancy fancy handle like mine. There you go, but it's the same thing. Now it's very easy to remove these. All you do is you get this and you get it at 45 degrees and you gently run it along the surface like this, being careful not to take out any little raised details like rivets and things like that. And you just run it along. You can get little cornery bits here by just using the tip, and your aim is just to run it along edges and get them all nice and smooth. If you've got any rough sanded areas as well, marks from sanding and stuff, you can also use this tool just to smooth them down. You could do this with a modelling knife or a craft blade or something like that, and it would be fine, except this is very stiff metal. It doesn't bend. It's very inflexible. So the beauty of that is that when you drag it across the surface, it just flattens the surface out. It doesn't skitter and jump. And by skittering and jumping with a knife blade, that's where you tend to get scratches and things like that in the surface and gouges. I recommend this tool because it doesn't do that. It doesn't jitter around. It doesn't bend. So what you do is you work your way around. Now you can see that you've still got a bit of a crease in the middle of the knee, but that's fine because it's supposed to have that little bit of a crease on his knee there and down the leg. So I'll work my way around all the parts and get these seam lines removed. And then when we come back, we'll actually get the assembly done. Yes, because it's the last bit of cleanup now. Back in a moment. And so on with the assemblage. Now for this I'm going to be using the Tamiya Extra Thin Cement, which is my favourite. Now some of these builds you don't need to glue, but this one looks like you're going to need to. Some of them are just push fit, but this one definitely isn't. Let's get started. So the first bit we need to do is attach the front of his belly, his big fat belly. Stick that on his torso. Now there's no real attachment pegs here, there's no locating pins that I can see, although it does snick into place. Do it on camera, dear. So what we're going to do is we're going to hold it together. Let's hold it together somehow. And I'm going to get my Tamiya Extra Thin, which is as thin as water. The beauty of this glue is you don't need a lot of it. It's not like tube glue or Revell contactor glue where you get a splodge of glue and it just stays like a splodge and it's messy. This stuff is like water. What you do is you quite simply touch it to where you want the glue to go. So if I want to get glue in here, I can put the parts together first, then I can touch the glue, and via the magic of capillary action it will suck in to the gap and glue it together. Now it's a welding cement, so it works by welding the plastic together. It melts the two contact surfaces and forms a really strong bond, because as the plastic unmelts it kind of splooges into each other and you end up, instead of like two parts held together with a splob of glue, you have two pieces that are now melded into one. So that's that bit. Next up we need to glue on to the leg, which will just sit and locate itself in there like that. So he's got a sort of striding forward look to him. Now what we're going to do here is, this is a bit structural. I could just hold it together, but it's got a bit of load bearing going on. It needs to sort of stay in a certain place. So what I'm going to do here, instead of just using the Tamiya Extra Thin, I'm going to use what I call Tamiya Fat Cement as well. And you'll see me do this occasionally for things like arms and legs and things. I might use some fat cement. It's just normal full fat, sort of thick polystyrene cement. What we're going to do here, I'm going to put a touch of it. In fact, no, let's put it on this piece. I'm going to put a touch of it here. Now the reason I'm doing this is a more gloopy, thick, squidgy cement. The reason I'm doing this is because, although it's not got quite as strong a grip as the thin cement, Tamiya Extra Thin is a welding cement. This stuff doesn't weld quite so much. Although it's not quite as weldy and thin, it does have a bit more stick to it, which means I can do that and it'll now stay in place. It just holds it in place while I then go in and attach the Extra Thin. Because Extra Thin itself takes a few seconds to sort of melt the plastic and have any kind of gripping effect. So if you've got two pieces that you need to put together, just using Extra Thin, they can easily fall apart. So using the fat cement, as I call it, just gives me a few seconds of time when it can sit there stuck together, and I can stop having to hold it together, and I can then put the Extra Thin in there. That'll again capillary itself into the little gaps, providing the strong bond. Next up we have the left arm, and this needs to go on here like this, you see, and it just sticks into place. Now again, if I just did Extra Thin cement on here, it would just fall off straight away because it's not exactly got a peg and a hole. It's not a very grippy situation. So I'm going to put the tiniest amount of full fat cement just there, just a tiny amount, just a blob, Then what I can do is glue this in place here. Stickatron, stickatron. Squish that in for a second. That's now got a bit of stick to it. So again, I can come in with the extra thin, work it around the gap. You really don't need much of this at all. Tiny, tiny amount. And just work that in. Now the Tamiya regular cement, what I keep calling the full fat cement, that's the same stuff as Revell Contactor or Humbrol Poly Glue, anything like that. And even some tube glues, it's the same kind of stuff as that. So if you've got any of those, you're good to go. You've got yourself the fat cement, or even the the Games Workshop polystyrene cement, which is this stuff that you get. You get this with the subscription. If you're a subscriber to the magazines, you get this stuff, the same stuff as the Tamiya full fat cement. So it's just as useful. I wouldn't recommend building the entire model with it though, just because when it splooges out of a gap, if you put two pieces together and squish them, when it splooges out, it can make a bit of an almighty mess. So the extra thin's better for that. So now we need to add t'other arm, and t'other arm, just quite simply, sploges onto there. That's not a word, is it? Sploges. That goes on. That looks like it's carrying a bottle of beer. Now that, again, always with arms and legs and things and torsos. When I do glue figures, you'll see, you won't really see any of these because these aren't full build Warhammer figures. But whenever I do them, I do always do the arms, more often than not the arms. I'll do the legs because they have separate legs and the proper ones, and I'll do the torsos where the torso meets the legs. But you won't really see me do the torsos on these because none of these are proper. I don't think any of these are going to be full build figures, unless the only thing I can think where we will have some old style full posable full build figures are some of the older Space Marine models. For example, the snipers, the Space Marines, the final phenomenon, the Space Marine snipers, because they're very old, and the motorbike dudes, again, they're very, very old, so they'll be proper full build kits. Basically, the way this Partwork works is that a lot of these are from things like the Dark Vengeance set and the Dark Imperium set, and they're kind of the slightly easy build ones where they're not full builds. But some of the older figures, not on the Chaos side but on the Space Marine side, some of those older figures are in fact older kits, and so they will have a proper assembly process. Okay, so that goes on there. So this one, again, just because I want it to stay in place straight away, tiny splub of glue, squidgy down, skvidge-tastic. That should stay in place for a moment. It just gives me a second to run the little extra thin in there. Now, Tamiya fat cement by itself will be absolutely fine, or your Games Workshop cement, or any of these cements will be absolutely fine. But I just think the extra strength provided by the extra thin is never anything to be sniffed at. I don't know if you can hear it, but my neighbour's dog, not the one next door, which is, they've left now, but the one that lives next door the other side, which just has the stupidest bark in the world. Sounds like a complete idiot is barking again. I don't know. So we'll put him to one side for a second. Actually, well, what we'll do, or will we? Ooh, don't know. I think what I'll do, we'll stick him on his base first. So he needs to go on a base here, like this C. So he's walking along. Put it in camera there. So it's a free base. I can put him anywhere I want. So I shall put him there. And for this, again, we're going to use the extra fat. Tamiya full fat. It's going to be the tip of his foot there. Oops. What I'll do is it's going to be out of focus. I do apologise because that's not where the camera's focused. I'm going to put him forward a bit on this base because he's got sticky out things at the back. So I'm going to squish him down. Again, apologies, it's out of focus. Hold him for a second. Now he should stick a little bit in. See, if I just did that with extra thin, he would be falling off straight away. So what I need to do now is get the extra thin and run that around the edges of his feet. It will suck under his feetses, his footses, as Bob Ross would say, his foots. Will suck under his foot, although Bob Ross says foot, and that will give them some super grip. So yeah, whenever I'm sticking people to a base, I always use the fat cement first. There we go. So that's him on there. Put him to one side for a moment. Next we need to put the schnoz on the head. He's got a big proboscis, and that just sits in here like that, and the wires go somewhere. Where do they go? They just seem to sit floating around for some reason. That dog needs to shut up. I hope you can hear it. It's some kind of labradoodle or spandoodle or some kind of nonsense made up breed that doesn't actually really exist in real life. It's just completely middle class nonsense. Cross of a Springer Spaniel and a poodle and a, I don't know, pain in the arse dog. Anyway, it's it's one of those rubbish breeds, and it's the dumbest. I don't know how this is supposed to go on. Doesn't seem to. Doesn't have. It's weird. There's a cable that goes out the side, but I don't seem to have anywhere the cable actually goes, which is strange. Other than I don't know where. It just seems to sit there in the middle of nowhere. It must link into that there on the side. So let's get it on. Let's get it on. Yes, we'll get some extra thin in the little hole in his face. Apologies, the focus is probably going to be out now because I knocked it and everything. I had to reset the focus. That goes in there. But what I'm going to do, because it doesn't seem to go anywhere, that cable, I'm going to now stick the head on the body while the other cement is still moist. And that just means I've got time then to get his head on, if I can stop throwing it everywhere, glue his head on, and get the cable in the right place, which seems to be there. Perfect. There we go. It just kind of fits in it nicely into that place. So it meets with the bit of stuff on the pauldron. There's a little sort of widget on the pauldron where it goes in there. So that goes in there. That to give it a little extra thin down under his fat chin. So yeah, so a lot of the figures are the sort of Dark Imperium, Dark Vengeance box set, and they're all the easy build ones, but the older ones are all the ones that came out around before these box sets. Like the Land Speeder and the guys on bikes and the snipers. So they're going to be full assembly kits. And so you'll have separate arms, separate legs, a separate torso. I need some tweezers. And the beauty of those, if you do get into collecting your Warhammers, is that with the proper full assembly kits, they are completely customizable. You can swap and change arms and legs between different figures. You can do a lot more. With these guys, they're kind of, you know, preset. You could customize them a bit, but it'd be a lot of hassle. But the old figures and the non-box set figures before Dark Imperium and Dark Vengeance, they're all fully customizable. You know, some good fun mixing heads and legs. You can mix up your Imperial Guard and your Admech. There we go, so that's the head on. The one last bit we need to do now is these two wings on the back, which aren't actually wings, they're just like little racks where he's got lots of grenades and things. And that needs to go on that side. I'm not sure where these actually attach. Okay. There and there. Okay, this is going to be a tenuous attachment here. And I have to register a complaint. Mama Fox is downstairs watching Midsummer Murders, which means all I've got in my head right now is the theme tune, and I hate the theme tune. It makes me angry. It makes me so angry. Okay, I'm not quite sure how this is supposed to fit. It doesn't seem to want to be that snug. I mean, I know how it goes on, I just don't see how it how it goes on, if that makes sense. Okay, that was a bit mind-blowing. Right, the way to get these things on is to look at it from this angle for each wing. So for this one, look at it from this side, not from that side. And what you have to do is, when you think you've got it lined up, it needs to stick up further than you think in this angle. I was putting it on like this and it wouldn't fit. You have to really push it up like that, so it sticks up like butterfly wings. And you can see here, hopefully, it just slots in beautifully. So as soon as you look at it from this angle, it fits. And for that wing, look at it from that angle, it fits perfectly. So I'm going to get a little tiny bit of glue, put it on there. You get this sometimes in models, it's a piece just doesn't seem to want to fit until you look at it from just the right angle. So we'll get that on there, we'll squish it down. Now I'm not using the fat cement here because that's too much, it'll be a big blob and it'll make a mess. So I'm having to hold it for a second with the extra thin cement. Hope it will stick a bit. Enough for me to move my hand. There we go. Now I can go in with more. And again, just touch it to the gap. And by touching it to the gap, don't have a fully loaded brush, just a bit of glue on the brush. By touching it to the gap, that's more than enough glue. So that is now the wings on, and that is the build section complete. So next we have to paint him. So what I'm going to do, you'll have seen me do it before, I'm going to go ahead and get him primed. Now it is windy and rainy outside, so I don't know if I'm going to have to prime it with the rattle cans, which I prefer to do, or prime it by brush. I'm not sure. I'm going to see what the weather's like and I'll let you know. So back in a second. Okay, so let's get cracking. Now the first step, I've said this before and I'll say it again, the first step of painting your miniature or any kind of model is you absolutely must apply a coat of primer. It doesn't say this in the magazine. The magazine would have you paint Death Guard green straight onto the bare plastic. This is the worst idea in the world because acrylic paint does not really stick to plastic at all well. And if you just paint straight onto the plastic, then as soon as you start handling the model, all that paint's going to come straight back off. So you must put a coat of primer down. Primer bonds to the plastic via various methods and then gives the paint something to grip to that isn't just smooth, shiny plastic. So if you want your paint to stay on the model, put a coat of primer down first. It's called primer because it primes the plastic ready for paint. So I've just used the Games Workshop rattle can of Death Guard green. It saves me a couple of jobs because it's a rattle can, I spray it on dead quickly and it's the right colour of green, it's Death Guard green. However, don't panic if you've not got that. Any old can of primer from Halfords will do, or rattle can of primer from wherever, doesn't really matter. Ideally though, if you can use a model making primer, either the Games Workshop ones are really good, Army Painter do a good range of primers, or if you've got an airbrush, you can use various primers for your airbrush as well if you want to get clever with it. But the only thing is, if you don't use the Death Guard green primer, you're going to have to then paint Death Guard green over it. So if you use Death Guard green, it's now the right green colour. If you use a different colour primer, like a rattle can or airbrush, then just go over the model with a coat of Death Guard green. That's the base green colour and you'll get to this spot. As always, while I'm painting this, I'm going to be using my homemade wet palette. Now, if you don't know what one is, I'll put a link up here. Go and watch my video about what is a wet palette and how do I make one and how do I use it. If you haven't got one, go and make one. It's dead simple to make. It costs you pounds and it will make your painting a billion times better. It'll make thinning the paints much easier and you'll just get a better finish when you do your painting. But I'm going to be using my wet palette, and what I like to do is get just the tiniest amount of water, you can't even see it on the brush here, tiniest amount of water, and just gently work it into the paint. Now the wet palette itself isn't wet and drippy, it's moist. Moist is all you want, and that's about as damp as I need it. That should now be thin enough to paint on. Never paint straight from the pot. You want to add the tiniest amount of water to your paint to get it moist to paint with, and that looks about right. So like I said, the first colour we're going to start with is Abaddon Black. Now we've got various bits we need to paint on here, so let me get some on the brush ready and we'll crack on. Now for this I'm using a small layer brush because there's some very fine details here. We need to paint first of all the tubing that goes down from the shoulder to the helmet to the schnoz, and there's two tubes here. There's a smooth one and there's a wrinkly ribbed one. It's the smooth one you want to paint, so you want to get your Abaddon black on there. Now when you first put the paint on there, it's going to look really streaky and horrible. Don't worry, if you've thinned your paint, that's correct. It's not going to be a solid thick coat. So let that first coat dry and do a second coat. So you want to get it on that pipe there. There's also, I don't think there's any interior undersuit to paint like on Space Marine, so that's fine. But there are these two patches on the back of the legs here. You need to make sure you paint these black as well. So just carefully go along. Now you can see there, hopefully, it is quite a thin colour because I've got it thinned a little bit. So I'll need to go over with a second coat. So that's fine. The reason you want to thin your paints a bit is if you go and splop the paint on there straight from the pot, it'll be horrible and lumpy and rubbish. It's always better to apply multiple thin coats than it is to put one big fat thick coat on there. And the other part you want to paint black, you'll have to refer to the magazine for this to find out which bits to paint, but various of these bottles and these grenades need to be painted black. So just have a look through the magazine and just see which bits specifically you need to paint. Now I'm not sure what's happening with these because on the model itself these are supposed to be clear glass bottles with fluids inside. That's quite thin there, so I'm going to maybe 2 or 3 coats of this. They're supposed to be colourful clear glass bottles with lots of glowing fluids in there, so I don't know how we're going to paint these or why we're painting them black for now, but it says to paint them black, and for this particular figure we're following the magazine. Now it does say to be careful and paint them slowly, and you can do, but don't panic if you get any of the black on like that on bits that are going to be a different colour later. If you need to, because I'm making a mess there deliberately, but if you need to, if you get paint where it shouldn't be, either just go back and touch it in with the Death Guard green where it should be green, or look ahead, see if that bit's supposed to be a different colour like gold later on, and if it is, that's fine, we'll just catch that when we paint it gold. So have a look through the magazine, there are quite a few bits to paint black, and just start your way working around getting all these painted. Okay, so that's all the black areas done. Now, as I'm sure you can see, I've not done the neatest job in the world. There's a few bits where it's a bit splodgy, I've got paint on the wrong bits. Yeah, it's a bit messy, but that's fine. That's fine. At this point, we don't need to worry about being super neat like it says in the magazine. Why? Because most of these areas where I've got black paint, where it shouldn't be black paint, they're going to be covered up with either lead belcher or gold colour anyway. And any areas that are left over at the end with still little bits of black paint on it, I can touch up with the Death Guard green. So it's no big problem. Now the next step we're going to do is the gold, and for that we're going to use my favourite colour in the whole world, Retributor Armour. Oh yes. So as always, I've got some on my wet palette. Now for this, I'm going a bit smaller with the brush. I'm using my Artificer brush. Which is even smaller than the small layer brush. What we're going to do here, we're going to be doing all the bits of the armour that you've seen me do before on these Chaos guys, on these Death Guard, and that's all the bits of trim around the armour. So things like the edges of the pauldrons here, which you've seen me do before, so I'm going to work my way around. Little bits here and there on the armour. Do check in the magazine to see exactly where it needs to be painted, like the trim here on the knee. You can see that needs to be the gold colour. We've got the trim around the bottom of the leg, which I'll do, and then on the armour itself, anywhere else, we've got the marking. Get some more paint on the brush. We've got the little fly symbol on the pauldron here. That needs to be done in gold. Now again, don't worry if you go over the edge or make any splodges, because you can tidy it with the Death Guard green. And on the back of the backpack, I'm kind of winging it with these, but I'm painting these little bits in the middle, just because I like to make them nice colours. So we'll get that bit done. And there's also, what do we have on this? Don't think there's anything on that pauldron and the marking, the trilobe marking there, but we do have lots of these bottles and grenades and things need to be done gold. So there's some trim around some of these, like on this bottle here. This trim part here is actually gold. Now on some of these bottles, the whole bottle is gold, like this one here. This bottle will be gold with lead belcher trim. So what I'm actually going to do is just paint the whole bottle gold for the moment, and then we'll come back with the lead belcher later and paint the trim parts. Now there is also rope or string around the neck of these bottles. We'll come back and touch that in at a later time. For the moment, once this all has been painted, I'm going to go back with the Death Guard green and just tidy up the bits of string and rope, just to tidy that up. But that's to be done later. I think we'll be painting like a rope colour later on. So for the moment, I'm just going to go ahead and get all the gold parts painted. Okay, so that's all the gold trim and bits done. You can see on some of the bottles I've just done parts of them, like the bits around the bottle here, in gold. And on others I've painted the whole bottle gold. I've just followed the photos in the magazine. The best bet. You can make it up if you want to, but I'm just going to follow the magazine for this figure. I have painted the whole of the weapon gold. Now this isn't all going to be gold, there is some trim on this, but I'm going to paint that in a moment with the lead belcher, so it doesn't matter if I paint the gold first. And I've just, as I say, followed around the magazine all the different bits and bobs that need to be all the right colours. So what's next? Next is the lead belcher. And for this, we're going to just paint a few more small details. So again, I'm going to use my layer brush, my small layer brush. And we're going to go in. We've got a few little details. We have, of course, on some of the bottles at the back, some of the straps and things around the bottles, they need to be done in lead belcher very carefully, so I'll probably use an artificer brush for that. But then we also have things like the sword blade here. I don't know if it's a sword or a knife. That's a bit thin. Let's get a bit more paint on that. Don't quite know if it's a sword or a knife, but it's one or the other. We'll get that painted on now. And there's also some chainmail at the back here. If you very carefully go and paint that in, just very carefully go ahead, and don't worry if you splodge paint anywhere. If you get any paint where there should be gold or the Death Guard green, just go and touch those in and tidy them up later. What else do we have? Also on the weapon, we have certain parts of the weapon, like these straps or these bits around the edge, these rings. These need to be painted with the lead belcher as well. So go ahead and get that done. Okay, that's the lead belcher done. Now I did forget to mention the parts around the face. You've got the steel tube that goes around there, and the top of his nose, the pipes around the head, and of course the centre of his 3 eyes. That needs to be lead belcher as well. And I've just carefully went around these bottles and painted the silver parts. I didn't really show you, but that's what I've done. Now it is easier if you want to, rather than trying to delicately paint these little sort of bits of frame around the bottles, just paint the whole bottom half silver with the lead belcher, and then go back with the gold or the black and touch that in. And keep in mind, when we do some shades later on, a lot of that will fade away and blend in and hide anyway, so you don't need to be 100% perfect. There are some little scrabbly bits I've got here with my lead belcher and this black tube that look a bit pants, but when I put some shade on that lead belcher, it'll look fine. Next, we're going to switch things up a little bit, and we're going to break from the order of the magazine. What we're going to do now is jump ahead a couple of steps to do the Bugman's Glow. Instead of doing those shades right now, we're going to do the Bugman's Glow first. And what I'm going to do, there's only a few bits to do on here. We have a tentacle up here on the upper arm. There's a tentacle there. We have the tentacle that's holding onto the knife or the sword or whatever that is. That needs to be painted. And there's also this death's head grenade here. Now there is a pot of gold that's supposed to come out of his mouth on here, but I've not painted that yet because this needs to be painted in Bugman's Glow first, and then we can go back and paint the gold bit. So I'll get all these bits done, and then we'll move on to shades. Yes. And that's the fleshy bits painted. So you can see that the death's head skull and the few tentacles have been done. I did miss a couple of tentacles at the back here, so keep an eye out for those. But with that done, it's now time to go backwards a step and move to the shades. And we're going to start with the Agrax Earth shade first, because most of this is gold and needs Agrax Earth shade. And all we're going to do here, you've seen it before, we're going to get some Agrax Earth shade on the brush. Quite generously, we're just going to go over the gold parts. And we're going to be not too careful. Again, these guys are supposed to be filthy and dirty and covered in plague and disease, so get a lot of Agrax on there. And remember, you want to make sure that your Agrax Earth shade goes over any little lips and lines. You want to really cover it. Now I'm going to go over these silver parts on the gun because it's just as easy to go over that with the Agrax. It won't look exactly the same, but it'll be fine, so don't worry. If you've got a bit where it's got gold and silver, you can kind of use either of the shades if you want. Either will do. So I'm going to go over all the gold bits and in some parts the silver areas. So I'll get all this done. And there we go, that's the Agrax Earth shade all on there, nice and grubby and grimy. Now one thing you can do going forward, and I never really mentioned this before, if assuming that we're not going to be doing much weathering on these guys, if you follow the magazine, one way you can sort of differentiate the gold trim on these guys to the gold trim on the Space Marines, and again it depends how far we take it later on, but if you want to, these guys are supposed to be dirty and filthy, you could always do 2 coats of Agrax Earth shade on the gold for these guys, for the Chaos guys, to differentiate them from the Space Marines. But again, it depends How much we're going to do later on that we don't know yet because we haven't had those magazines, so let's wait and see. Anyway, next step and the last step is get the Nuln oil. Good old Nuln oil, my favourite shade. And for this, we're just going to apply it to the silver areas. So like the sword here, we're going to be quite generous. As always, don't prissy around with it. Just get a brush full on there and let it flow into the recesses and go where it needs to go. Make sure it doesn't pool up anywhere. And just have fun with it. And then obviously on this skirting here, on this bit of chainmail, we'll go in there. So all the silver areas. And this includes any of the bottles that are black and silver. Any of the grenades and bottles, because you can just do them with an overall coat of Nuln oil. A bit like that. There we go. Lovely. And there we have it, that's issue 15 complete, and for the moment the Biologus Putrifier is complete as well. Now he's obviously not fully complete, we'll be going back in future episodes and applying more colours and different techniques, as I'm sure the magazine will have us do. But for now, you can go and play him on the tabletop if you're following along with the game part of this Partwork. Little handy tips as always, don't forget when you're painting these guys, try and be as neat as possible, but don't worry if you make any mistakes. If you sort of get paint where it shouldn't be, go back and touch it in and clean it up before you go to the shade level. Just if you get a bit of gold where it should be green, just touching the green once the gold's dried. And don't forget the secret rule of painting these miniatures: shades hide all your sins. If all your edges aren't super crisp and straight, don't panic. The shade will hide the edges and make everything blend together. So don't worry too much, especially if you're an absolute beginner. Don't worry too much about being super crisp and neat with the straight edges. Just get it as good as you can. There's a lot of things you can fix in the mix. But like I said, that's going to do us for issue 15. We'll come back to him, no doubt, at a future date. Next up, the next issue will be issue 16, How Bizarre. And that will be 2 Intercessors, an Inceptor, and 2 Hellblasters. Now, the Intercessors, I've shown you building and painting them so far already, so I'll just get them done. I won't feature those. We'll obviously look at the Inceptor. We'll have a look at building that and painting that. And we will have a look at the Hellblasters as well, because we haven't built any of those yet. Now, they are going to be following the magazine, those guys, because they're just more Space Marines. We've shown Space Marines. We've got one to one side. We've got Captain Calcium, who I will do at some point, I promise. But for the rest of the rank and file, we're just going to follow the magazine. However, when I do the plasma weapons on the Hellblasters, I will actually show you that, not as a separate episode, but like an advanced technique in the next episode, just to show you how I go about doing plasma weapons. And I may film it in such a way I can actually do it as a standalone episode as well, so we'll see. But that's coming up in the next episode, which will be issue 16. Anyway, that's enough waffle. Go make something awesome, go be awesome, and until next time, adios amebas.